So where do we need to start with ourselves to start improving who we are in our households?
So I think it's a great question. That's a big question that can
Yeah.
go in. It's like an oak tree, right?
Yeah.
It's one thing, but it's also several branches. But
Right.
the trunk is yourself, right? If and what a lot of men will do, and this was me included too, is I would try to selflessly serve everybody else and never serve or lead myself, and that leads to people that you're leading really hungry and thirsty because you're not doing it well. So I think every man needs an anchor, right? And
Yep.
for me, it's fitness and faith.
Yep.
And so if I am not doing those two things literally on a daily basis, I'm in my Bible every single day. I'm
Awesome.
moving my body every single day. And if I don't do that, I don't feel good in my spirit. I don't feel good in my body. Therefore, I'm not going to feel good in my mind. And the output of that is my energy and my leadership.
Yeah.
So, like right before we hit record today, my 20-year-old called me and asked for advice on what he could get from Chipotle because he's trying to be fit. And he just got a inline body scan. He's a bit more overweight than he wants to be. But the one thing I do take pride in is like I have to emulate the man that I want my young men to be.
Yeah.
Right. So like, and if I'm not doing that, then they're not going, no matter what I say, because it doesn't matter whatever, it's not what it's about what we teach. It's about what they catch. So it's about, it's not what's about being taught. It's about what's being caught.
Mm.
So, I have to lead myself. That's priority number one. That's not selfish. That's selfless
Yep.
because my output has to be good for them. The second thing, my second, first of all, it's God,
Yeah.
and it's then leading myself and then leading my marriage. What a lot of couples do, and I think it's human nature. Once we get married and then we start having kids, the frying pans of our marriage get put on the back burner and we put those kids on the front. The
Right.
problem with that is that those burners never change, or we never give attention to that back burner.
Mm.
And we think that we're doing the right thing by prioritizing the kids. And when I say priority, they're like a fraction of a fraction of a fraction, underneath my wife. It's not like I come home and, oh, I know you have a broken leg, but me and mom have a date. You
Right.
know what I mean? Excuse me. It's not that. And plus, there are times where your kids are going to need more of your attention. And
Right.
there are times your marriage is going to need more attention. But um, the way my wife view our marriage is we are the walking, talking 3D motion picture of what a healthy relation could look like or a really bad one could look like.
Mm. Yep.
So we purposely, intentionally, and wholeheartedly love each other with everything that we have. And I fulfill her three basic needs as a wife because what she needs from me is to be seen, heard, and safe. She needs those things from me. And for me, I need to be respected. That's why she won't disagree with me, even if she disagrees with me in front of the kids. That's out of respect. She'll do that privately. She also knows a man needs appreciation and physical affection.
Yeah.
But I can't expect her to fulfill my needs unless I'm fulfilling hers and vice versa.
Right.
So we communicate well, right? We conflict resolute really well. There was even this thing. My wife and I hardly ever argued. That wasn't always so, but it's because I
Yeah.
didn't know the skills. But it's about 6 years ago. My 20-year-old, I think he was 14 at the time. My wife and I were in a pretty heated discussion in our like on our deck outside. Our kids were playing, and my 14-year-old, who's now 20, came up the stairs, and we weren't yelling or anything like that, but he could tell that there was tension, and he stopped in his tracks. He's like, "Are you guys okay?" And I was like, "Not really right now." And he goes, "Are you fighting?" And I was like, we're disagreeing right now. I was like, "We're not fighting." And he goes, "Are you gonna get divorced?"
Yeah.
I was like, I was like, "What?" And I was like, "No, man. Like, we don't give these kids any indication. In fact, it's the opposite. We have a goal to gross them out as much as possible, and no kidding around."
That's
And
awesome.
I said, I look at my wife and I said, "Hey," I just kind of whispered. I was like, "Can he sit down and watch us go through this? Like, watch us resolve?" And she's like, "Yeah." And I said, "Ethan," I was like, "have a seat." And he's like, "Why?" I was like, "We're disagreeing, but I want you to watch how we get through this." And he's like, "Okay." And he pulled up a seat. I don't even
Mm.
remember what the thing was my wife and I were disagreeing about, but we
Probably
went
get
through
in a
this.
hot tub or something. No, just kidding.
Yeah, good one. Yeah.
No.
Um, but anyway, after we resolved everything, And it wasn't, me being right or her being right. It was us. It was a win-win situation. That's what we always go for.
Yeah.
And I looked at him and I was like, "What did you see?" And he goes, "That was pretty cool." I was like, "What was cool about it?" He goes, "Well, you didn't yell at each other." I was like, "We don't yell at each other. That's one of our boundaries and expectations of each other, that even in a disagreement, we talk as calmly as we are right now. What else did you notice?" And he's like, "You guys were holding hands." I was like, "Yeah, we hold hands when we disagree." I was like, "What else?" He goes, "No one talked over the other person. You guys listened to each other." I was like, "Yeah." I was like, "What else?" And he goes, "You came to an agreement at the end." I was like, "That's how you resolve conflict." And so, like, I want our kids to see that kind of stuff because that's how they learn. And luckily now, 6 years later, he's got a long-term girlfriend who's 2 years. My 18-year-old's been dating the same girl since eighth grade. But I look at these two relationships and they're really actually like mature and healthy. And they haven't told me this, but they've told my wife like that the reason that they're better in relationships is because they've watched mom and dad. But they've never told me that. I would love for them to tell me that, but they haven't. But I think you've got to prioritize that marriage and lead within that marriage. And then the third element is obviously leading the kids, right? And I'm a big proponent of when I lead my kids, I lead them through questions and not lectures
Mm,
because I want them to articulate the things that might have been wrong, what they're going to do about it, how they're going to solve a problem, whatever that problem is. I resist so badly wanting to jump in and just tell them what to do.
right.
But by me leading them is leading them through questions so they can articulate and be critical thinkers.
Mm. Yeah, I like that one a lot. And that's something I try to do, even my kids being young, is let them try to like figure things out or like not necessarily just come right to the rescue. Like if they're trying to reach something and they can safely, like there's a way for them to safely do it. I'm like, well, how do you think you could maybe get to that book or
Yeah.
get to that toy or whatever it is? Do you think there's a way you could do it? And like let them kind of process through and see them. And most of the time they figure it out. It's just cool to kind of see that. And I think, with your wife and you, I think communication just in general, you and your spouse, you and your kids, you and your coworkers, you and your friends, like communication, I feel like is becoming, I don't go too dramatic, but like a lost art almost because everything's online. It's so easy to just send something without repercussions or actually seeing a person's face when you say it. I think people are forgetting how to actually communicate and have disagreements or be upset without attacking, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so that's something to really, I think a lot of people need to focus on, even if they don't have kids or even if they're not married. Where's communication? Where are the pieces of communication that we need to really focus on in today's world that have been kind of forgotten about? I know, like you just mentioned, for one, being calm, right? Not talking over raise your voice. Is there other things with communication that with our kids, spouses, just people in general that we can improve upon or think about when we're doing it?
So, absolutely. So in our groups, like we teach a lot of these tactical skills, and like I
Mm,
also lead like a marriage cohort where, I teach 11 tactical skills on how to create, an extraordinary marriage.
right.
And a lot of it has to do with the way that we operate within communication. So, and I'm also going to quote GS Youngblood. I'm a huge fan of his work, huge fan of his work. I've had him on the podcast. We hosted an event called the Men's Forge a couple months ago. He was one of the speakers, but I love that guy. He wrote a great book called The Masculine in Relationship. That book will change your life. It's so good. And he keeps things really simple too. So, like his book, The Masculine Relationship, he has what he calls the three-part blueprint.
Okay.
One is respond versus react, right?
Mm,
So no matter what is coming your way, right? Because anything can be kind of triggering. Let's just take a conversation with your wife, right? She could be venting about something, like it could be the kids, her girlfriends, like something. We sometimes get triggered by that and we react to it. And sometimes, like I'm working with a client right now, he's very reactive. Like he's so reactive. He takes everything personally. Like one of the biggest lifts I'm trying to teach him is like, you can't take these things personally.
yeah.
He's like, what if it's like about me? I was like, it's the same rules. I was like, so you have to be responsive. Like you have to, like one of the skills that I teach in that course is creating an environment of psychological safety. And that sounds like an academic term, which it kind of is, but what is that? Psychological safety is if you've ever been in a conversation with somebody and you just gush, and then like after you leave, you're like, oh my God, like I can't believe I said all that. Like, and you text the person like, sorry, I probably said too much. And like that person provided an environment that was free from shame, blame, pain, and guilt. And that's
Mm.
really, you can learn to manufacture that environment where people are going to freely talk about things. And one of the things I talked about on Bernthal's podcast is that's so important when you're raising kids, because kids are going to go through really, really dark times. And
Yep.
if you are not their go-to, like the example that I used, and in the past year, I've had to become my oldest son's and my second son's um, 3 a.m. call.
Mm.
And not because they were drinking too much or anything like that. It just, they were in a situation and they had to get out of it.
Yep.
And, but your kids are going to have, let's just take drinking or doing drugs. They're going to be at a party, 17, 18 years old. They're going to have that phone in their hand and they're going to be like, well, do I call dad or do I roll the dice and
Mm.
drive home? I've always told my kids, but you've got to put those reps in to create
Yep.
psychological safety. So the second element after being calm is lead with structure, right? And leading with structure doesn't necessarily mean you're going to solve the problem. You're going to have a very fruitful conversation with guidelines and boundaries, right? And then the third element is what I just said, which is provide safety, right? So let's just take, for instance, a woman who's venting, right, about
Sure.
something. Let's just say it's the kids. As soon as she's venting about something, we immediately want to go in and fix the problem. Like, well, you
Right.
should do this, you should do that. Like, well, have you thought about doing this? And I always use the word should as like you're shoulding all over somebody, right? And nobody likes that. Like my wife
Right.
has this super tight relationship with her mom, like they're really, really tight. But even in that feminine relationship, my my mother-in-law, bless her heart, she's the greatest mother-in-law on the planet. I love her to death. She's basically like my mom. I've known her for 30 years, but if my wife goes to her and talks to her about something, she gets met with, well, Jessica, you should be doing this and you should be doing that. Why aren't
Right.
you doing this? And she always starts everything with, well, Jessica. And so she is very guarded about some of the topics that she'll talk about with her mom. Instead of fixing things or all over somebody, you want to validate, just simply validate where they're at. And validation just sounds like that sounds really frustrating, like really frustrating. Like in your situation, I don't know anybody who wouldn't be frustrated. So tell me more about that. What's going on? And when you do that in conversation with your wife, and I also teach attraction and polarity,
Mm.
you become the most attractive man in the room. And
Yep.
but this is a minefield for men because we're thinking like, I know exactly what to do. I don't know if you've ever seen the YouTube video of It's Not About the Nail. Have you ever heard of this?
Yeah.
Okay. So
Yeah.
like it's a perfect example. It's a minute and 42-second video, but every man should watch that video because it's so true. The guy's literally telling her she's got this nail sticking out of her head and she's complaining how she's got a headache and snagging her
Yeah.
sweaters and she can't sleep. And he's like, well, pull the nail out. She's like, it's not about the nail. And she gets really fiery and frustrated. And finally he's just like, okay, I'll listen. What is it? And she keeps going on and on. And he's looking at her like she's nuts. But then he's like, that sounds really hard. And then she melts. And it's obviously exaggerated because it's meant to be
Right.
funny, but those
Mhm.
same rules do apply. So when you validate somebody else's emotions, and then you normalize it by saying something like, anybody be frustrated in that situation. And then when you say, tell me more versus like, why do you feel that bad? Or why are you so angry? It's not that big of a
Mhm.
deal because that's what we want to do sometimes. When you say, tell me more, that's an invite and they're going to keep talking. The more that they are talking and the more that you're intently listening, the more attracted to you she is, the more polarity you have, the more you're actually leading, quite frankly, in that space than what you think.